You know, I'm a preacher as well. This has been just like church. You show up ready to preach, and then there's a hymn, and then there's an announcement, and another announcement, a prayer, a drawing. No. By the time I get up here, I'm ready to go. Now, what's interesting to me is that usually I'm asked to talk to folks about how to get in the newspaper. And I get it, that y'all actually want some advice on how to stay out of the newspaper. So it's a slightly different program. Oh, and obviously you can tell I'm not the TV guy. I have a face for radio. And you keep listening, you realize that I have a voice for newspaper. I am from rural eastern Oklahoma, and all that implies. I started with a bad joke. I'm going to skip that. So. I want to tell a few war stories at first that will actually probably confirm your worst fears in some ways. But they're true. And there were lessons learned, I think, by everybody. So that's why one of the reasons that you tell war stories, I think, isn't it? I've made one enemy in 15 years. Now, I have since let go of that anger and I have forgiven this person, but I really made an enemy. But just one time in 15 years in this business, I was so mad that I kept a note to myself in my desk drawer that reminded me of the details of it. And if I felt my anger subsiding, I'd pick it up and I'd read it to stoke that anger. I did not always used to be a preacher. A nonprofit leader out to buy an apartment complex told me that he'd entered a contract for X amount of dollars for the property. And I wrote a story based on that, even though it hadn't closed yet. And I usually don't touch a transaction until it's closed, because until the money's transferred, anything can happen, right? But I did in this case because it was a nonprofit, and because it involved tax-free bonds. And then the deadline, I did not check with the seller. It's a nonprofit, it's tax-free bonds. What could go wrong? Well, I went to the paper on a Saturday, and come Saturday morning, the apartment owner called me at the house, and he was furious, and he chewed me out, rightly. He most certainly was not under contract, and he most certainly was not under contract for X amount of dollars. He unloaded on me, and I deserved every bit of it. I was new to town, new to this beat, frankly, and again, I've explained why I let my judgment slip a little bit. It was a nonprofit, and the government was involved. But he crossed the daddy line, because it was my 14-year-old stepdaughter that picked the phone up that Saturday morning, and he unloaded on the first person who got on the phone. And she comes and runs and hands me the phone, and she's red-faced, and she's got tears in her eyes, and I was just infuriated at this jackass. I will not tell you who he is, but he's still active in this town. As I say, I've truly have forgiven him, but I don't trust him. I trust his judgment to this day. Now, that's an unusual situation involving family, right? I feel justified in my anger. I don't feel justified in sticking the details in a desk drawer to stoke my anger. And I'm happy to say I have truly forgiven him. But forgiveness is one thing. We're not friends, though, see. Here's another war story. In late 99 or 2000, I reported a deal that fell through, which is also very rare, right? Because if I don't touch a story until the money's transferred, I don't know when deals fall through. But I knew that this one fell through because it involved Leadership Square. Too prominent to ignore, right? I probably wouldn't have touched it if it had been any other building. Well, here are some numbers. It cost $94 million to build in 1982 to 84, okay? When it opened just in time for the oil bust. Bad timing for MetLife, which built it. In 94, MetLife turned down a $52 million offer for it, as I was told by knowledgeable sources. 5 years later, in the deal that fell through that I reported, negotiations were supposedly in the range of $60 to $65 million, as I was told by knowledgeable sources, close to the situation, as they say. And I don't do that hardly ever, but I did. I reported it again because it was Leadership Square. Behold the power of the press. The county reads the paper. The county read my story. My story confirmed what the county had been hearing. The county raised its assessed value of Leadership Square from $36.6 million in 99 to $57.5 million in the year 2000. $21 million. It was the most expensive story I've ever written. Now, it was $21 million on paper, and in terms of the tax bill, Not that it mattered much in the big picture, because it sold that April for $45 million, less than half what it cost to build 15 years before, and $15 to $20 million less than what MetLife had been negotiating for, and $7 million less than what MetLife turned down 5 years before. And those numbers are still mind-boggling to me, a kid from Sequoia County. I promise, I look at Leadership Square and I look at Devon Tower and I think, man, you could stack a bunch of hay in that. In fact, I figured out how many round bales of hay you could stack in Devon Tower, and I'm going to write that column one of these days. I haven't got to it yet. One more war story. I lost what I thought were a couple of friends in this business a couple of years ago, and a sad lesson. And a reminder that while you and I can get together for coffee or beer or Coke, we can have lunch together, we could play tennis together if that's what we did, but we can't be friends. We can't be friends, not as long as I'm a journalist and you're on my news beat. Someone I thought was a friend was so upset at a story I wrote, a good story about good news, but it wasn't the great story that they were used to getting. They were so upset that they came to the paper and accused me of deliberately downplaying it. No, I was swamped that day, and I did the best I could with the time that I had. And I told them so as friends, and I spoke too frankly. I spoke to these guys like you do to your friends when you're under pressure. Not polished, with no apology, with some pressure and some color. And I don't know what I was thinking. Big-time real estate executives and me ciphering out how much hay you can stack in Leadership Square, thinking we could be friends. They went to my boss's boss, and their complaint and my explanation went on my permanent record, as they say, on a file. They're forgiven, but we're not friends. That's the news business. We can be friendly, but we can't be friends. That's just the cold, hard facts of life, isn't it? Okay, now let's say that you're not trying to get it in the paper, but something has happened, maybe good, maybe bad, that's dragged you and your property into the news. And a reporter calls. Please take the call or return it if you want to be sure that your viewpoint is heard by the reporter. I'm careful there. It doesn't guarantee your viewpoint will be in the story, but at least it guarantees that your viewpoint will have been heard by the reporter, because if a reporter is calling you, there's going to be a story, whether or not you take the call or return it. I think lots of people pick the phone up or hear that a reporter's called, right? And then they think, if I don't pick it up, there won't be a story. It's not true. It's simply not true. If you can't speak for your boss, your owner, or your boss, say so. But for your boss's sake, help me get a hold of your boss, if that's what I'm out to do. If he declines to comment, great. But I think your boss deserves the chance to do that unless you have been authorized to speak or not speak for the boss in all circumstances. And I don't believe one size ever fits all. I don't believe that anybody can be given blanket authority to speak for the boss, because I just don't believe that, because you can't anticipate the future. So I'm questioning that. Avoiding the call almost always makes you and your business look worse. The absence of your voice, because you're not invisible. You didn't return the phone call. That's what it says. Or you declined to comment, and that's fine. But that's what it says. So you're not going to be out of the story just because you don't engage the journalist. Don't say, I can't comment, and then keep commenting. Half the people do that. Oh, I can't talk about that, but let me tell you. Because you will be quoted. Unless you say clearly, don't quote me, or this is off the record, or something like that. If there's any questions, lots of reporters will try to clear it up before going on. If they're fair, and I'm a fair guy, I do, especially if I've never talked to you before. If you're on my regular beat and I'm talking to you all the time and you screw up, I'm going to let you. Sorry, you should know better. But if I've called you for the very first time and we stumble into a danger zone, I'm not going to let you hang yourself. I'm not. Some will. But I'm not going to. I'm going to say, now wait a minute, let's be clear. Is this on the record or not? And that may spook you. And if that spooks the story, I'd rather have the story spooked than be reporting something unfair that reflects badly on you, because I'm not out ever to reflect badly on anybody. News reflects badly on somebody sometime, but I don't want to have to take the blame for it, and I don't want to be responsible for it, is what I mean to say. Just never forget, the world is on the record. The world is on the record, and it has to be turned off. Something said at the table just now, if said in front of another journalist in another city, probably would be online by now, because it pertains directly to some breaking news of the day. Because I'm who I am, and because we are who we are, I think, in Oklahoma City, and we tend to play more fairly with one another, I think, I would never do that. But I'm telling you, whew, maybe in Chicago, maybe in Dallas, maybe here with other people, but not with me. If a reporter says he's on deadline, it's in your best interest to help him meet that deadline. Because once the story's turned in, then that's the story until the next story. At the end of the day, the story is whatever I can get by my deadline. No story is ever complete until it's been completely told, and sometimes, very often, it takes more than one story. You know, Devon layoffs will be stories until they're done. The more complete the first story is, the fewer follow-ups and the fewer phone calls you have to deal with for me or whoever. Now, on friendly feature stories, I always tell people my only guarantee is that this won't hurt you a bit, and it might help. If the news is bad, it's not my fault. I'm doing my job, and I work for readers and viewers and my boss and my publisher, and I'm doing what I'm told to do, just like y'all are. It's never personal. Unless you make it personal, like the guy that called and bawled out my kid, or the guys that came down to the office and were gunning for my job. Don't make it personal. I don't. At least I try not to. I act within the authority that I'm given, just like you do. I do what I'm told, and I use the judgment that I have until I'm told to do something else, right? We all do that, I think. Sometimes that can result in a win-win situation, and sometimes it flat can't. It sounds harsh, but life is like that sometimes. Communicating clearly and plainly, though, almost always smooths out the rough edges. I do want to talk a bit about how to get things in the paper. You know, what's really funny to me is that I know y'all work to stay out of the news, and you're very successful at it, because I know one face in this room. And I've been doing this for 16 years. So if you want to keep staying out of the press, keep doing whatever it is you're doing. But here's another way to think of what you do in the property that you manage. It could be that there's a story in your property that doesn't have to do with you as managers or owners directly, but if reported could reflect well on your property. Now, does that make sense? You've got a tenant that has a story. It's a human interest story, or it's a business story. Your oldest tenant, been there since 1952. I mean, I don't know what it is, but if there's a story that might be told in your property, pitch it. Because in the telling of it, your property will look as good as they do. It's just something to think about. Different ways to think about how y'all are part or could be part of the news. It doesn't always have to be the sewer's backed up or a truck drives into your front entrance or whatever, or your roof collapses. It doesn't always have to be that. It can be good news, but you got to think about it, because most people really don't think that way about this. I do honestly work as hard to keep crap out of the paper and out of newsok.com as I work to get good stuff in, because people are lined up to get their stories in the paper, and a lot of times it's just free advertising. That's what they want. And now that line crosses all the time. And for different reasons, I might do a story that in effect is a heck of an advertisement. But we have some other reason. I or the paper has another compelling reason. It's of human interest worthy enough to give that advertising away for whatever reason. I tell home builders all the time, since most of my work is in residential, probably 70% of it, we build houses is not a story. We build quality houses, not a story. Everybody says that. We lease office space. Great. I manage an office building. We have leased office space to a new home builder dedicated to growing, aging in place, to that growing demographic. Now you're onto something. I think people really do know the difference between news and what ought to be paid advertising. But if you're not sure, ask me. I will be glad to tell you. No offense, that's part of my job as well. There are stories everywhere, and I'll be happy to help you figure out what yours is or what might be among your tenants. But it might not be what you think it is. And here's an example of a story that was a story to me because of who I am and my background. Roy Oliver, whose name you recognize, made a little bitty real estate investment back in 1999. A little $75,000 transaction down by the stockyards at 1307 South Avenue. In '99, he had not yet bought up half of downtown. So it wasn't who he was that made it news. And a $75,000 transaction, frankly, is not big news. It's a house. It's a small house. It was the backstory that made the $75,000 transaction a nice little story. That two-story building, about 4,000 square feet, real rough, kind of rough around the hems, was built in 1929 and had always been in the same family, descendants of Earl Deneu, the founder of National Saddlery Company on Agnew, by the stockyards, the biggest stock or cattle market in the world, a saddle shop. In 1929, and it sold in '99. That's a story. It's a great little story, and it was obvious to me, and it might not have gotten your attention. It hooked me because I grew up on a ranch. I grew up as a farm kid, and it's never far from me. I thought that was a great little feature story about the saddlery that had been there since the Depression, next to the stockyards in the heart of Stockyard City. So think in those kinds of terms when you're thinking about your tenants. Now, I have not said a thing about press releases or PR or marketing pitches. Pick up the phone and call me or email me if you've got an idea, and be personal in it. Don't say news release. God love you, don't put news release in the subject line of your email, and don't put press release. Those are blizzard. I open those when I have time to open them, because every other email I get gives me a compelling reason to stop and look at it. The press release isn't it, right? It's a blizzard of those. And the first thing I will see is the subject line. So don't put news release and then put your news in the email. Put it in the subject line. I'll give you a couple of examples, and then I'll be done so my colleague here can get going. Don't put transaction. It's brokers I'm usually talking to. Don't put transaction. Put Thunder moves front office. Whoa. Put Kellogg leases 100,000 square feet in OKC. See what's hooking me? If it's not obviously local, put OKC in there, or Edmond, or Yukon, or Gaillardia, or whatever, Council Road, something like that. That to me says that this is not some PR guy in Dallas trying to get free advertising. It's somebody local with something that I really need to look at. OKC firm wins multi-million-dollar contract. I'm going to stop, drop, and roll on that one, buddy. I'm going to open it right up. Yukon company expands lease and hires 10. I'm there. Donald Trump buys Edmond office park. You got me. And it's not because of Trump, it's because Edmond is in the subject line. We are parochial at the Oklahoman. We worry about and report about and care about Oklahoma and Oklahoma City, mostly. We pay to get the wire copy. We work to get the local news. Help us. When it's in your interest to do so, please help us. And when the news gets you, most of us aren't out to get you. We're just out to do our job, and communication is the key. That's all.